She sat on the mafia boss's lap to avoid her ex-husband. He whispered, "I'll protect you." The ambient lighting inside Serafina was designed to make everyone look beautiful, but at 2 in the morning, Lena Carter felt far from glamorous. The high-end Italian lounge in downtown Harborview was finally emptying out, the low hum of jazz replaced by the clinking of glassware as the bussers moved like shadows between the velvet booths. Lena adjusted the strap of her apron, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at the knot of tension between her shoulder blades. Her feet throbbed in her sensible black non-slip shoes, a dull ache that she had learned to ignore after 6 years of double shifts and standing on concrete floors. She picked up a heavy tray of empty martini glasses, balancing it on her hip as she navigated the maze of mahogany tables. Her mind was not on the task at hand, nor was it on the impressive tips she had made that night. Her thoughts were a chaotic ledger of numbers and time. Rent was due in 4 days. The electric bill was past due. Eli needed new sneakers for school because he had grown an entire size in 3 months, and the Velcro on his current pair was holding on by a thread. Eli. Just thinking of her 6-year-old son brought a simultaneous wave of warmth and anxiety to her chest. He was likely asleep now, curled up with his stuffed dinosaur at Mrs. Gable's apartment down the hall. Mrs. Gable was kind, a grandmotherly figure who accepted payment in homemade lasagna and gratitude, but Lena hated leaving him. She hated that she missed bedtime stories and morning cuddles because she was here, wiping condensation rings off tables for people who spent more on a single bottle of wine than she spent on groceries for a month. Lena reached the service station and set the tray down with a heavy sigh. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket to check in with Mrs. Gable. But her heart stopped the moment the screen lit up. It was not a text from the babysitter. The notifications were stacked on her lock screen, a wall of gray bubbles that turned her blood to ice. They were all from Derek. "I know you are working tonight. Pick up the phone. Lena, you think a piece of paper can keep me away from my own son? I am coming to see you. Do not ignore me." Lena's hand shook so violently that she nearly dropped the device. She stared at the timestamps. The last one had come through only 5 minutes ago. She pressed the delete button, scrubbing the messages from her view. But she could not scrub the fear that crawled up her spine. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, 6 months since the judge had granted the restraining order, and yet Derek Walsh was everywhere. He was a shadow in her peripheral vision. Last week, she had seen his beat-up sedan idling across the street from their apartment building. 2 days ago, a coworker mentioned a man with restless eyes asking what time Lena got off work. Derek was unraveling. The control he had exerted over her for 7 years had been broken, and he was not handling the loss of power well. He alternated between weeping apologies and terrifying rage, and Lena was the lightning rod for all of it. She shoved the phone back into her pocket, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She could not fall apart here. She had a job to do, and she needed this job. Serafina paid better than any other restaurant in the city, mostly because the clientele was a mix of politicians, old money, and men who carried cash in thick rolls bound by rubber bands. Speaking of which, Lena glanced toward the VIP section, a raised platform in the back corner of the lounge, shrouded in shadows and separated by heavy velvet ropes. Only one booth was occupied. Nico Costa sat there, as he often did on Thursday nights. He was alone, which was rare for a man of his stature, though 2 large men in ill-fitting suits hovered near the entrance of the VIP area, their eyes scanning the room with bored vigilance. Lena knew very little about Nico Costa. Other than the whispers shared in the break room, the other waitresses called him the Prince of Harborview. They said his family had built half the city and ran the other half through channels that did not appear on tax returns. Lena tried not to listen to the rumors. She only knew him as the man who drank Macallan Rare Cask, spoke in a low, polite baritone, and tipped 100% on every bill. He looked different from the other patrons. He did not posture. He sat with a stillness that was almost unnerving, one arm draped casually over the back of the leather booth, his legs crossed at the ankle. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him with architectural precision, the fabric expensive and matte. The crisp white cuffs of his shirt were visible, and just peeking out from beneath the left one was the dark ink of a tattoo that disappeared up his forearm. As Lena watched, he lifted his glass, his gaze drifting lazily across the room. He had dark eyes, heavy-lidded and unreadable, framed by thick lashes that seemed at odds with the sharp, predatory cut of his jaw. He looked dangerous. Yes, but in a way that felt controlled, like a tiger behind glass. Lena looked away quickly, not wanting to be caught staring. She grabbed a rag and moved to wipe down table 4, trying to focus on the circular motion of her hand. Just 20 more minutes, she told herself. Then I can lock the doors, get a cab, and go home to Eli. The heavy oak door at the front of the lounge slammed open against the wall. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Lena jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She spun around, clutching the damp rag to her chest. Derek stood in the entryway. He looked manic. His hair was disheveled, his jacket unzipped, and his eyes were wild as they darted around the dim interior of the club. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, and even from across the room, Lena could sense the volatile energy radiating off him. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. The hostess, a petite college student named Sarah, stepped forward, holding up a hand. "Sir, we are closed," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "You cannot come in here." Derek ignored her completely. He shoved past her, his heavy boots thudding against the plush carpet. He was scanning the faces of the few remaining customers, looking for her. Lena froze. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her limbs. She was trapped. The bar was between her and the kitchen exit. The restrooms were a dead end. If she ran, he would see her immediately. If she stayed standing in the middle of the floor, she was a sitting duck. He took another step into the room, his head snapping toward the service station she had just left. Lena took a step back, her breath hitching in her throat. She needed to hide. She needed a shield. Her eyes landed on the VIP booth. Nico Costa was watching the commotion at the door, his expression unchanged, his glass suspended halfway to his mouth. He was the only person in the room who did not look afraid. He looked like a fortress. Lena did not think. Instinct, primal and desperate, took over. She dropped the rag. She moved fast, her feet silent on the carpet, darting toward the raised platform. She slipped past the velvet rope before Nico's bodyguards could register her presence. Nico turned his head as she approached, his dark eyebrows lifting in mild surprise. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to ask her what she was doing, but Lena did not give him the chance. She reached the booth and, without a single word of explanation, slid onto the leather bench. But she did not sit next to him. There was no time for that. Derek was turning his head. His gaze was sweeping toward this corner of the room. Lena turned and sat directly on Nico Costa's lap. The contact was shocking. His thighs were hard as granite beneath her. She let out a shaky breath and looped her arm around his broad shoulders, burying her face in the crook of his neck to hide her profile. She pressed her body against his, trembling so hard she thought she might shatter. She smelled him then, a rich, intoxicating blend of sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and clean, warm skin. It was a scent of power and stability, so different from the stale beer and desperation that clung to Derek. "Play along," she whispered frantically against the collar of his shirt. Her voice was barely audible, a terrified thread of sound. "Please, my ex is here. I need you to pretend for a heartbeat." Nico did not move. Lena felt the tension in his body, the rigid surprise of a man who was not used to being touched without permission. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for him to shove her away, waiting for him to expose her to the monster stalking across the room. Then, his hand moved. Large, warm fingers settled firmly on her waist. The touch was heavy, possessive. He did not push her away. Instead, he pulled her closer, shifting her so she was settled more securely against his chest. His other hand came up to rest on the back of her head, his fingers threading through her hair, shielding her face from view. "I have got you," he murmured. His voice vibrated through his chest, a low rumble that she felt against her own ribcage. It was the most grounding sound she had ever heard. Lena sagged against him, her forehead resting on his shoulder. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart. It was calm. He was calm. She heard heavy footsteps stop near the edge of the VIP section. "What is this?" Derek's voice was a rasp of confusion and rising anger. Lena flinched, her grip on Nico's jacket tightening until her knuckles turned white. Nico did not look at her. He kept one hand soothingly on her back, his thumb rubbing small, slow circles against her spine. He lifted his head, directing a gaze of cool, lethal boredom toward the man standing at the ropes. "Can I help you?" Nico asked. His tone was polite, but there was an edge to it, sharp as a razor blade hidden in silk. Derek was staring at them. Lena could picture the look on his face, the shock of seeing his ex-wife, the woman he claimed ownership over, curled intimately in the lap of another man, a man who wore a suit that cost more than Derek's car. "I am looking for Lena," Derek spat out. "That is her." "Get off him, Lena!" Nico's hand on her waist tightened just a fraction, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that signaled ownership. It was a silent message to Derek. "She is mine right now." "The lady is busy," Nico said. His voice dropped an octave, losing its veneer of politeness. "And you are interrupting my evening." Derek took a step forward, his hands balling into fists. "I am her husband." "Ex-husband," Lena whispered into Nico's skin, unable to stop herself. Nico heard her. He shifted slightly, angling his body to block her even more effectively from Derek's line of sight. "She does not look like she wants to talk to you," Nico said. Suddenly, the air around the booth shifted. The two men who had been standing guard stepped forward. They moved with a synchronized, fluid grace that spoke of professional violence. They did not draw weapons. They simply became a wall of muscle between the booth and Derek. "Sir," one of the guards said, his voice flat, "it is time for you to leave." Derek looked from the guards to Nico, and then to the sliver of Lena he could see. He looked like he wanted to scream, to tear the place apart. But even in his manic state, Derek had a survival instinct. He looked at Nico's cold, dead eyes, and he saw something that terrified him more than his own jealousy. He saw a predator who was much, much bigger than he was. "You are making a mistake." "Lena," Derek snarled, though he was backing away. "You think this guy cares about you? You are pathetic." Lena squeezed her eyes shut, tears hot and stinging against her lashes. She hated him. She hated that he could make her feel this small even when she was safe. "Get him out of here," Nico said. He did not shout. He barely raised his voice above a conversational level, but the command was absolute. The guard stepped into Derek's space, crowding him, forcing him to turn. Derek shouted something else, a final obscenity, but he was being marched toward the door. The sound of his boots scuffling against the floor faded, followed by the heavy thud of the front door closing. Silence descended on the lounge again. Lena let out a sob she had been holding back, her shoulders shaking. She knew she should move. She knew she should get off this stranger's lap and apologize for the intrusion. But her legs felt like jelly, and the warmth of his body was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. "You do not have to look at him," Nico said softly. He leaned his head down, his mouth hovering just beside her ear. His breath was warm, sending a confusing shiver racing down her neck that had nothing to do with fear. "I will protect you tonight," he whispered. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enormous. "I will protect you." It was a promise she had not heard in years. It was a promise Derek had broken 1,000 times. Lena slowly pulled back, lifting her head to look at him. Her face was inches from his. Up close, his eyes were not just dark, they were a complex depth of obsidian and espresso. There was a fleck of gold in his right iris. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was not looking at her like a nuisance or a waitress. He was looking at her like she was a riddle he intended to solve. Thank you," she stammered. Her voice was hoarse. "I'm so sorry. I did not know what else to do." Nico did not let go of her waist, His thumb continued that hypnotic, soothing rhythm against her side. "Do not apologize," he said. His gaze dropped to her mouth for a split second before flicking back to her eyes. "Is he always like that?" Lena nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "He does not handle rejection well. There is a restraining order, but—" "Paper shields," Nico murmured. He shifted his weight, and Lena suddenly realized just how intimate their position was. She was straddling the most powerful crime boss in the city. Her hips pressed against his, her hand still resting on his shoulder. She scrambled to stand up, her face flushing hot with embarrassment. "Oh God, I am sorry. I should get up." Nico's hands lingered on her hips for a moment longer than necessary, steadying her as she found her footing on the floor. He did not immediately withdraw. He kept one hand on her arm, as if he thought she might fall over if he let go. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the empty spot on the bench beside him. "Just for a minute. You are shaking." Lena hesitated, then sank onto the leather seat. The distance between them was respectable now, but she could still feel the phantom pressure of his body against hers. "Who is he?" Nico asked. He reached for his glass of scotch, taking a slow sip. "Derek, my ex-husband," Lena said, staring at her hands. He thinks I still belong to him." Nico set the glass down. The sound was sharp against the table. "Does he hurt you?" The question was direct, devoid of pity. "He used to," Lena admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Now he just hunts me. He follows me. He sends texts. He wants to scare me." Nico turned his head, studying her profile. He took in the fraying hem of her apron, the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. He saw a woman who was fighting a war she was ill-equipped to win. "He cannot get back in here tonight," Nico said. "My men are at the door, but you cannot walk home alone." "I live just a few blocks away," Lena said quickly. "I will take a cab. I cannot ask you for anything else." Nico ignored her protest. He pulled a sleek black phone from his inside pocket and tapped out a message. "My driver is outside," he said, sliding the phone back away. "He will take you to your door, and he will wait until you are inside and the lock is turned." "No, really, Lena," Nico said. He said her name as if he had been saying it for years. It rolled off his tongue with a familiarity that made her pulse skip. "Look at me." She looked at him. "You sat on my lap," he said, a faint, dry amusement curling the corner of his mouth. "We are past the point of polite refusals. Let me make sure you get home to—" "Who is waiting for you?" Lena blinked. "My son, Eli. Let me make sure you get home to Eli safely," Nico finished. The mention of her son broke the last of her resistance. She could risk herself, but she could not risk Derek waiting for her in the shadows, potentially finding out where she was sleeping tonight. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay, thank you." Nico nodded once, satisfied. He signaled to one of the guards, who immediately approached the table. "Enzo, take Miss—" "Carter," Lena supplied. "Lena Carter, take Miss Carter home," Nico ordered. "Wait until she is safe inside. If you see the ex-husband, deal with it." Enzo nodded sharply. "Yes, boss." Lena stood up, her legs feeling a little steadier. She looked down at Nico. He remained seated, looking perfectly at ease in his dark corner of the world. He was a criminal. She knew that. She knew he did terrible things to maintain the power he held. But tonight, he was the only safe place in the city. "Thank you, Nico," she said again. Nico looked up at her. His expression softened. Just a fraction. The mask of the mafia boss slipped, revealing a man who looked genuinely concerned. "Get home safe, Lena," he said. As she followed the bodyguard toward the exit, she could feel Nico's eyes on her back. She did not turn around, but the sensation lingered, a heavy, protective weight that followed her out into the cold night air. For the first time in months, she did not look over her shoulder for Derek. She got into the back of the sleek black sedan, and as the heavy door thudded shut, shielding her from the street, she touched the spot on her waist where Nico's hand had rested. Her skin still felt warm. The morning sun that filtered into Lena's small apartment was unforgiving. It highlighted the dust motes dancing in the air, the scuffs on the baseboards that she had scrubbed a dozen times, and the dark circles under her eyes reflected in the microwave door. Lena stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with a mechanical rhythm, her mind already 3 hours ahead of her body. Eli sat at the wobbly kitchen table, his legs swinging back and forth, too short to reach the linoleum floor. He was humming a cartoon theme song, blissfully unaware of the tension that coiled like a spring in his mother's chest. "Mommy, can I have extra syrup?" Eli asked, holding up his plate with a hopeful grin. Lena forced a smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes but was enough to fool a 6-year-old. Just a little bit. Bug. "We do not want you bouncing off the walls at school today." She poured the syrup, watching the amber liquid pool around the edges of the pancake. It was a mundane moment, a safe moment, but Lena felt fragile. Every time her phone buzzed on the counter, her stomach dropped. She had put Derek on silent, but the phantom vibration ghosted against her nerves regardless. She helped Eli into his jacket, the one with the slightly fraying cuffs, and tied his shoes. The Velcro on the left sneaker was giving up, barely holding the strap in place. "We need to get you new shoes," she murmured, pressing the strap down firmly. "I like these ones," Eli said, kicking his feet. "They make me run fast." Lena kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. It was the smell of innocence, a stark contrast to the cologne and cigar smoke that had clung to her hair the night before. "I know, baby, but even the fastest runners need new gear sometimes." The walk to school was an exercise in paranoia. Lena held Eli's hand tighter than usual, her eyes scanning every parked car, every passerby in a hooded sweatshirt. She saw Derek in every shadow. She saw his beat-up sedan at every stop sign. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, this feeling of being hunted in broad daylight. When she finally dropped Eli off at the school gate, watching him run toward his friends without a backward glance, the relief was so sharp it almost hurt. She was safe for 6 hours. He was safe for 6 hours. But the clock was always ticking. That evening, the atmosphere at Serafina was buzzing. It was Friday, and the weekend crowd had descended with their designer handbags and loud laughter. Lena moved through her section with practiced efficiency, balancing trays and dodging bussers, but her eyes kept darting to the door. She'd not expected to see him. Nico Costa was sitting at table 12. It was not the VIP booth. It was a regular four-top near the window, right in the center of her section. He was alone again, though she spotted Enzo, the bodyguard from the night before, standing discreetly near the bar. Nico looked different tonight. He had shed the tie, and his dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. He looked less like a king on a throne and more like a man looking for a quiet drink. Lena approached the table, her heart doing a traitorous little flip in her chest. "Good evening, Mr. Costa." Nico looked up from the menu he wasn't reading, his dark eyes locked onto hers, and a slow, lazy smile spread across his face. It transformed him, softening the hard angles of his jaw. "Please," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the ambient noise. "If you call me Mr. Costa, I feel like I'm in a meeting with my accountant. Call me Nico." Lena felt a flush rise up her neck. "Nico, then, can I get you the usual?" "Macallan, neat," he confirmed, "and maybe some water. I have a feeling it is going to be a long night." As Lena turned to leave, he spoke again. "You look tired, Lena." She paused, clutching her notepad. It was not an insult. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a strange amount of gentleness. "It is a long week," she said defensively. He nodded, watching her. "I imagine it is." "Bring the drink, and then come back." "I have a business proposition for you." Lena's guard went up instantly. A business proposition from a mafia boss usually meant something illegal, dangerous, or compromising. She fetched his scotch, her mind racing. When she returned, she placed the glass on a coaster with a trembling hand. "What kind of proposition?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Nico gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Sit for a moment. My men will make sure your other tables are not neglected." Lena hesitated, glancing at her manager, who was busily ignoring everything Nico did. She sat down on the edge of the chair, ready to bolt, Nico took a sip of his drink, savoring the burn. "I need an events manager," he said simply. Lena blinked. "What?" "Serafina does a lot of private parties," he explained. "Weddings, corporate dinners, the occasional retirement party for judges who should have retired 10 years ago. It is a logistical nightmare for the current management. I own a significant stake in this place. Lena, I want someone competent running that side of the business." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "The hours are 9 to 5, mostly, unless there is an evening event, in which case you oversee the setup and leave by 10. The pay is double what you make in tips, and it comes with benefits, health insurance, paid time off." Lena stared at him. It sounded like a lifeline. It sounded like a dream. No more 2 a.m. closes. No more walking to her car in the dark, terrified. Weekends off with Eli. Enough money to buy him 10 pairs of sneakers. "Why me?" she asked. Suspicion warring with hope. "You do not even know me." "I know you are observant," Nico said. "I know you work hard. And I know you are desperate enough to take the job seriously, but smart enough not to ask questions about things that do not concern you." He paused, his gaze dropping to her hands, which were clenched in her lap. "And frankly, I would prefer if you were not working the floor late at night. It makes it harder to ensure you are safe." The admission hung in the air between them. He was not just offering her a job, he was offering her a shield. Lena felt a lump form in her throat. I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it," Nico said. "I have a son," she blurted out. I cannot be involved in anything dangerous. Nico, if you are offering this because you think I will, I am offering this because you are a good mother," Nico interrupted, his voice firm, "and good mothers should not have to be afraid to go to work. The job is legitimate, Lena. The paycheck comes from the restaurant, not from me. It is clean." Lena looked at him, searching for the lie. She found only a steady, dark intensity. "I will think about it," she whispered. "Good." As they sat there, a sudden movement outside the window caught Lena's eye. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows on the sidewalk, and for a second, a face pressed close to the glass. It was Derek. His face was contorted, a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He was staring right at them. He saw Lena sitting with Nico, saw the intimate lean of their bodies, the way Nico was looking at her. Lena gasped, recoiling as if she had been slapped. Nico turned his head, following her gaze, but Derek was already gone, slipping back into the darkness like a wraith. "He saw us," Lena whispered, panic clawing at her throat. "Oh God, he saw us." Nico turned back to her, his expression hardening. "Let him see. He needs to learn that you are out of his reach. You do not understand," Lena said, standing up abruptly. "He's not going to learn. He's going to explode." She hurried away from the table, needing to put distance between herself and the window, between herself and Nico. She hid in the employee restroom, splashing cold water on her face, trying to stop her hands from shaking. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Once. Twice. 10 times. She pulled it out, dread pooling in her stomach. "So that is it. You are sleeping with gangsters now? I saw him. Lena, I know who he is. You are exposing our son to criminals. I am going to call my lawyer. You are unfit. You are dangerous. I am coming for Eli. You are not going to keep him in a house paid for by blood money." Tears pricked Lena's eyes. He was twisting everything. He was going to use this against her. She had sat down for 5 minutes to discuss a job, and Derek was already spinning a narrative that could lose her custody of her son. She composed herself, or tried to, and walked back out onto the floor. She needed to tell Nico no. She needed to tell him to stay away. It was too dangerous. The cost was too high. She marched back to table 12. Nico was watching her approach, his eyes narrowing as he took in her pale face. "I cannot take the job," Lena said, her voice trembling, "and I cannot talk to you anymore. Please." "He is texting me. He is saying he is going to take Eli because I am associating with you." Nico's jaw tightened. "Let me see the messages." "No, Lena, let me see them." Reluctantly, she unlocked her phone and handed it to him. Nico scrolled through the barrage of hate, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. He handed the phone back to her gently. He is bluffing. Lena, he is trying to scare you into submission. It is a control tactic. You do not know him, Lena argued. He's not just talking. She stopped, taking a breath. Nico stood up. He towered over her, but he did not step into her personal space. He stayed back, giving her room to breathe. I know men like him, Nico said quietly. They are cowards. They prey on fear. If you run, he chases. If you stand still, he circles. You need to become something he cannot touch. I am just a waitress. Nico, Lena cried, her voice cracking. I am not a mob boss. I cannot fight him like you can. Nico reached out, his hand hovering near her arm before he seemingly thought better of it and let it drop. But his eyes caught something. The sleeve of her uniform had ridden up slightly when she gestured, revealing a cluster of faint, yellowing bruises on her forearm. They were old, fading, but unmistakable. Finger marks. Nico stared at them. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He did that? Nico asked. His voice was devoid of emotion, which made it terrifying. Lena quickly pulled her sleeve down, crossing her arms over her chest. It was a few weeks ago. I was trying to close the door. It does not matter. It matters, Nico said. He looked at her, really looked at her, stripping away the brave face she wore for the world. He saw the bruises, the exhaustion, the terror she carried like a second skin. Meet me upstairs, he said abruptly. What? The rooftop terrace? After you close out your drawer, meet me up there. I told you, I cannot. We need to discuss the job properly, Nico interrupted. And we need to discuss your ex-husband, because whether you take the job or not, Lena, I am already involved. He made sure of that when he threatened you in my presence. He signaled for the check, dropping a stack of cash on the table that was far more than the scotch cost. Upstairs. 20 minutes, please. The please was what did it. It wasn't a command. It was a request. 20 minutes later. Lena stood in the staff bathroom, reapplying her lipstick. She told herself she was just making herself look professional. She told herself she was just hiding the fatigue. But as she smoothed her hair and pinched her cheeks to bring some color back, she knew she was lying. She wanted to look good for him, and that terrified her almost as much as Derek did. She took the service elevator to the roof. When the doors opened, the city noise faded into a distant hum. The terrace was empty of customers, illuminated only by strings of warm Edison bulb lights strung between the pergola beams. Nico had arranged a small table near the edge of the roof, overlooking the Harborview skyline. There was a bottle of wine, open and breathing, and 2 plates of antipasto that looked like they had been plated by the head chef himself. He was standing by the railing, looking out at the glittering grid of the city. When he heard the elevator doors close, he turned. The wind caught the lapels of his jacket, and the soft light cast shadows across his face. You came, he said. I am curious, Lena admitted, walking toward him. The cool night air felt good against her flush skin. Nico pulled out a chair for her. Sit, eat. You look like you have not had a real meal in days. They sat. For a while, they just ate. The food was incredible. Cured meats, sharp cheeses, marinated olives. Lena realized she was starving. She hadn't eaten since breakfast with Eli. Nico poured the wine, a deep, rich red. My parents came here with nothing, Nico said suddenly, breaking the silence. They lived in a 2-room apartment in the East End. My father worked construction. My mother cleaned houses. They wanted me to be a doctor. Or a lawyer, a legitimate lawyer. Lena watched him over the rim of her glass. What happened? My brother happened, Nico said, a shadow passing over his eyes. Santino. He was older, charismatic, wild. He got involved in the life before he could drive a car. He thought he was invincible. He took a sip of wine, his gaze distant. He was killed when I was 20. The people who killed him, they threatened my parents next, so I stepped in. I took over his debts, his connections. I made sure no one would ever touch my family again. He looked at Lena. I became what I needed to be to keep them safe. And now, it is the only thing I know how to be." Lena set her glass down. It was a tragic story, but it was also a warning. He was telling her exactly who he was. "I met Derek in college," Lena said, offering her own truth in return. "He was the captain of the debate team, charming, intense. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world. We got married 3 months after graduation. She traced the stem of her wine glass. It started small. He didn't like my friends. He didn't like my clothes. He checked my mileage on the car. By the time I realized I was in a cage, the door was already locked. And then Eli came. And I stayed because I thought a father was important. I stayed until I realized that a father who hits the walls is worse than no father at all." Nico reached across the table, and he didn't touch her, but his hand rested near hers on the white tablecloth. "You got out," Nico said. "That takes more strength than anything I have ever done." A sudden gust of wind swept across the roof, rattling the string lights. Lena shivered, rubbing her bare arms. Her uniform was short-sleeved, meant for the warm interior of the lounge, not the chilly spring night. Without hesitation, Nico stood up and shrugged off his suit jacket. It was heavy, lined with silk, and still held the warmth of his body. He walked around the table and draped it over her shoulders. His hands lingered there for a heartbeat. His fingers brushed against her collarbone, a touch so light it felt like electricity. Lena froze. She could feel him standing just behind her. She could smell the sandalwood and tobacco again, richer now, enveloping her. She turned in her chair, looking up at him. Nico was looking down at her, his expression unguarded for the first time. There was a hunger in his eyes, raw and undeniable, but it was tempered by a profound restraint. "You should not be cold," he murmured. The air between them crackled. It was magnetic. Lena felt herself leaning toward him, drawn in by the gravity of his presence. Everything logically told her to run. He was dangerous. Her ex was watching. Her life was complicated enough, but emotionally, she had never felt safer than she did wrapped in his jacket. Nico raised his hand slowly. He gave her plenty of time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her cheek. His palm was rough, warm, and incredibly gentle. His thumb swept across her cheekbone, wiping away a stray eyelash. "Is this okay?" he asked silently, his eyes searching hers. Lena let out a shaky breath. "Yes," she whispered. He leaned in. The kiss was not like the movies. It wasn't crashing music and fireworks. It was slow, deliberate. He tasted of red wine and darkness. His lips were firm against hers, moving with a patience that made her knees weak. Lena's hands found their way up his chest, clutching the crisp cotton of his shirt. She could feel the hard muscle beneath, the steady thrum of his heart. She opened to him, and he deepened the kiss, a groan vibrating in his throat. It was a kiss that tasted of promises. It tasted of protection. For a moment, the world fell away. There was no Derek, no threatening texts, no court dates. There was just the warmth of Nico's mouth, the strength of his hand on her jaw, and the terrifying, wonderful realization that she was standing on a precipice, and she was about to jump. They broke apart slowly, breathless. Lena's lips were swollen, her cheeks flushed a deep crimson. Nico rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged. He ran his thumb over her lower lip, his touch reverent. "I will take care of it. Lena," he whispered against her mouth. "The job, Derek, everything, just let me in." Lena looked at him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was terrified of what it meant to fall for a man like him. But as she looked into his dark eyes, she realized she was even more terrified of a life without him. "Okay," she breathed. Nico pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, holding her as if she were the only fragile thing in a city made of concrete and steel, and for the first time in years. Lena let herself be held. The fluorescent lights of the family court hearing room buzzed with a low, headache-inducing hum that seemed to vibrate right through Lena's skull. She sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, trying to maintain a posture of calm stability while her insides churned with anxiety. Beside her, her court-appointed attorney, a weary woman named Mrs. Holloway shuffled papers with a sigh that suggested she had already lost interest in the outcome. Across the aisle, Derek sat next to his lawyer, a man whose suit cost more than Lena made in a year. Derek was performing the role of the aggrieved father perfectly. He wore a muted blue sweater over a collared shirt, his hair combed neatly, his expression one of pained concern. He would glance at the judge, then at Lena with a look that said, "I just want to help her." It made Lena want to scream. "Your Honor," Derek's lawyer began, standing up and buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "We are not here to disparage Miss Carter. We understand that being a single mother is difficult. However, we are deeply concerned about the environment she is creating for the minor child." Eli. He walked toward the bench, holding a manila envelope. "Miss Carter claims to fear for her safety, yet she has recently been observed socializing with individuals who pose a significant threat to public safety. I would like to submit these into evidence." Lena stiffened. She watched as the lawyer handed a stack of photographs to the judge. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, flipped through them. Her expression remained neutral, but the silence in the room grew heavy. "May I see those?" "Mrs." Holloway asked. The lawyer handed a copy to Lena's table. Lena looked down, and her breath hitched in her throat. They were grainy, taken from a distance with a zoom lens, but the subjects were unmistakable. It was Lena and Nico on the rooftop terrace of Serafina. One photo showed them sitting at the table, the wine bottle between them. Another showed Nico placing his jacket over her shoulders. The last one, the one that made Lena's stomach drop, captured the moment Nico had cupped her cheek, their faces inches apart, just before they kissed. In the context of the photos, it did not look like a moment of comfort. It looked like a clandestine meeting with a mob boss. "Who is the man in these photos?" the judge asked, looking over her glasses at Lena. Lena stood up, her legs trembling. "His name is Nico Costa. Your Honor, he is my employer. I am the new events manager at his restaurant. Mr. Costa is a known figure in organized crime investigations," Derek's lawyer interjected smoothly. "He has been linked to racketeering, gambling, and violent assault. Is this the kind of role model Miss Carter intends to bring into her son's life? A man who requires armed bodyguards to eat dinner?" "I was discussing a job offer," Lena said, her voice rising slightly. "It was a business meeting on a romantic rooftop at midnight," the lawyer countered, raising an eyebrow. "With wine and physical intimacy?" "Objection, Mrs." Holloway said, though she sounded tired. "Speculation." The judge held up a hand. "Enough." She set the photos down and looked at Lena with a disappointed frown. "Miss Carter, you're under a microscope right now. Associating with individuals who have complicated legal histories does not help your case. It shows poor judgment. But he is the only one who has helped me." Lena wanted to shout. Instead, she bit her tongue. "Tasting copper. I am not changing the custody arrangement today," the judge ruled, and Lena let out a breath she did not know she was holding. "However, I am entering a formal warning to the record. Both parents are expected to provide a stable, moral environment for the child. If I see evidence that Eli is being exposed to criminal elements or unsafe situations, I will not hesitate to grant Mr. Walsh full temporary custody pending an investigation. Do you understand, Miss Carter?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lena whispered. She felt Derek's gaze on her as she sat down. She refused to look at him, but she could feel his triumph radiating across the aisle like heat from a fire. When the hearing was adjourned, Lena gathered her purse and fled the courtroom. She felt dirty, exposed, and incredibly angry. Derek had twisted a moment of kindness into a weapon. He had taken the one good thing that had happened to her, her connection with Nico, and turned it into a noose. She pushed through the heavy double doors into the hallway, desperate for fresh air. "Miss Carter." Lena stopped. A man was standing near the water fountain, blocking her path to the exit. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit that looked off the rack but well-fitted. He had a military haircut and eyes that were too alert. "I am Agent Monroe," he said, flashing a badge that was clipped to his belt. "Organized Crime Division. Can I have a word?" Lena clutched her purse strap. I do not have anything to say to you. I just want to go home. I was in the back of the courtroom, Monroe said, falling into step beside her as she kept walking. Rough break in there. Walsh's lawyer is a shark. Lena did not respond. She kept her eyes on the exit sign. Look, I will be straight with you, Monroe said, his voice lowering. We know you are getting close to Nico Costa. We've been watching him for 2 years. We know he is charming. We know he likes to play the hero. But guys like him do not have girlfriends. Miss Carter, they have liabilities. Lena stopped and turned to face him. He's not my boyfriend. Monroe gave her a pitying look. The judge seems to think otherwise, and so does your ex-husband. Here is the reality. Costa is going to go down. It is a matter of when, not if. When that happens, you do not want to be standing next to him. You want to be on the side of the people who can help you. He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. Help us, and we can help you with your custody situation. A good word from a federal agent goes a long way in family court. We can make Derek Walsh's complaints disappear. All we need is information. Who he meets with, where he keeps his books, what he talks about when he thinks no one is listening. Lena looked at the card. It was a lifeline. Gleaming white in the harsh hallway light, it was the smart choice. Betray Nico, save herself, secure Eli. But then she remembered Nico's hand on her waist when Derek had stormed into the club. She remembered him standing between her and danger. She remembered the way he looked at her, with respect, not ownership. She looked up at Monroe. I am a waitress, Agent Monroe. I serve pasta and wine. I do not know anything about books or meetings. She did not take the card. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking loudly on the linoleum floor, leaving the agent watching her with a shaking head. By the time Lena reached her apartment building, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the brick facade. She had picked up Eli from school earlier and dropped him off at Mrs. Gable's for an hour so she could clean the apartment and decompress before bringing him home for dinner. She needed to wash the court smell off her skin. She walked up the 3 flights of stairs, her legs feeling like lead. All she wanted was to lock the door, order a pizza, and watch cartoons with her son until the world felt simple again. She reached her landing and froze. Her apartment door was closed, but the wood around the lock was splintered, deep. Jagged scratches marred the paint, exposing the raw timber beneath. It looked like someone had taken a screwdriver to the deadbolt. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached out, her hand trembling, and pushed gently on the door. It swung open. It was not locked. Silence greeted her, a heavy, ominous silence that felt different from an empty house. She did not go inside. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to grab Eli and flee. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers slick with cold sweat. Her thumb hovered over the emergency dial button, but then she remembered Monroe. She remembered the judge. If she called the police, there would be a report. Derek would find out. He would use it to prove she lived in an unsafe neighborhood, that she could not protect their son. She scrolled down and pressed the contact she had saved only 2 days ago. Nico picked up on the first ring. Lena? He was here, she whispered, her voice cracking. Nico, someone broke in. The door is open. Where are you? His voice changed instantly. It went from warm to steel hard. I am in the hallway. I have not gone in. Good. Do not go in. Do not touch anything. Is Eli with you? No. He's at the neighbors down the hall. Stay there. Go to the neighbors. Lock the door. I am 5 minutes away. The line went dead. Lena ran down the hall to Mrs. Gable's apartment. She banged on the door until the confused elderly woman opened it. Lena practically fell inside, hugging a surprised Eli so hard he squeaked. She sat on Mrs. Gable's floral sofa, staring at the door, counting the seconds. Exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, there was a knock. Not a frantic pounding, but a firm, decisive rap. It is me. Nico's voice came through the wood. Lena opened the door. Nico stood there, flanked by Enzo and another large man she did not recognize. Nico was not wearing a suit today. He wore a black leather jacket and dark jeans, looking ready for a fight. He looked at her, scanning her for injuries. Are you hurt? No. She shook her head, just scared. "Stay here with Eli," he ordered gently. "Enzo, stay with them." He nodded to the other man, and they moved down the hall toward her apartment. Lena waited, clutching Eli's hand, listening to the murmurs of their voices. 10 minutes later, Nico returned. His face was grim. "The apartment is clear," he said. "Whoever it was, they are gone. They tossed the place." Drawers pulled out, clothes on the floor, but they left this on the kitchen table. He held up a piece of paper. It was a page torn from a yellow legal pad. Lena took it. The handwriting was jagged, aggressive. "I can walk in any time I want. Do you really think you can keep him from me? Next time, Eli might be caught in the middle. Stop playing games." Lena, there was no signature, but there didn't need to be. Lena felt the room spin. She crumpled the note in her fist, a sob tearing from her throat. "He is never going to stop. He's going to hurt us. He's crazy. Nico, he's actually crazy." Eli looked up, his eyes wide with fear, seeing his mother cry. "Mommy?" Nico stepped forward. He didn't care that Mrs. Gable was watching. He didn't care about the bodyguards. He reached out and pulled Lena into his chest, wrapping his arms around her tightly. He smelled of leather and the cold night air. He felt like a rock in a storm. "Shh," he murmured into her hair. "I have got you. It is okay." "I cannot stay here," Lena sobbed into his jacket. "I cannot bring Eli back in there. He has a key, or he knows how to pick the lock. He'll come back while we are sleeping." "I know," Nico said firmly. "You're not staying here." He pulled back slightly, his hands gripping her shoulders to make her look at him. "Pack a bag. Just the essentials for you and the boy. You are coming with me." "I cannot," Lena protested weakly. "The judge, if she finds out you stayed in an apartment with a broken lock where a stalker left a threat, she will take your son for negligence," Nico said, his voice hard with reality. "I have a penthouse downtown. It is in a building owned by a shell company. My name is not on the lease. Derek does not know it exists. It has 24-hour security and steel doors. You will be safe there." Lena looked at Eli, who was clutching his dinosaur, looking small and confused. She looked at the crumpled note in her hand. She had no other choice. "Okay," she whispered. The penthouse was a different world. It was located on the top floor of a glass needle in the center of the financial district. The elevator opened directly into the foyer. The floors were polished concrete, the furniture modern and sleek, and the view was a panoramic ocean of city lights stretching to the harbor. It was beautiful, but it felt like a fortress. Nico had arranged for a woman named Maria, an older, stern-looking matron who was apparently the mother of one of his lieutenants, to watch Eli. She had whisked the boy away to a guest room that had a massive television and, surprisingly, a stack of comic books. Lena stood in the sunken living room, staring out at the city. She had a glass of water in her hand, but she couldn't bring herself to drink it. The adrenaline of the break-in was fading, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her limbs feel heavy. Nico walked in from the hallway. He had taken off his leather jacket, revealing a black t-shirt that clung to his chest. He looked tired, too, the lines around his eyes more pronounced in the dim light. "Eli is asleep," he said softly. "Maria is reading in the chair next to the bed. She will not leave his side." "Thank you," Lena said. She turned to face him. "I mean it. I do not know what I would have done tonight without you. Probably sat in the hallway and cried until the police came." Nico walked over to the couch and sat down, scrubbing a hand over his face. "You would have figured it out. You are stronger than you think, Lena." Lena let out a bitter laugh. "I do not feel strong. I feel like I'm constantly running. I'm so tired of being afraid, Nico. I'm so tired of looking over my shoulder." She walked over to the couch and sank down on the opposite end. She pulled her legs up, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Today in court, Derek's lawyer made me sound like a criminal just for knowing you. And then the break-in. It feels like the walls are closing in." Nico watched her. His gaze was dark and intense. "I am sorry that knowing me is a burden." "It is not a burden," Lena said quickly and looking at him. "You are the only person who makes me feel safe. That is the irony. The criminal protects me, and the law-abiding citizen hunts me. Nico moved closer. He didn't slide across the cushion. He simply shifted his weight, leaning into her space. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jaw. "You deserve to feel safe all the time," he said. "Not just when I am around." Lena leaned into his touch. It was instinctive. Her body recognized his as a source of comfort. "I do not want to be alone right now," she whispered. Nico didn't speak. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, just breathing, sharing the same air. The tension of the day, the fear, the anger, it all seemed to pool between them, transforming into something else, something hotter. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle like the kiss on the rooftop. It was desperate. It was a kiss born of adrenaline and the primal need to affirm that they were both still alive. Still here. Lena made a small sound in her throat and opened her mouth to him. Nico's hand splayed over her back, pulling her toward him. Lena scrambled to get closer, her knees finding purchase on the cushions. Without breaking the kiss, she moved, climbing over the gap between them until she was straddling his lap. It was an echo of their first meeting at the club, but the context had shifted entirely. There was no fear now, only desire. She felt the hard ridge of his belt buckle against her stomach, the heat of his thighs beneath hers. Nico groaned low in his throat. His hands went to her waist, gripping her firmly. His thumbs began to draw slow, maddening circles against the fabric of her shirt, sending shivers racing up her spine. Lena's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. She wanted to lose herself in him. She wanted to forget Derek, the court, the note. She wanted to be consumed. She ground her hips down, just slightly, and felt Nico's whole body tense. His grip on her waist tightened to the point of pain, but it was a good pain. It grounded her. Nico broke the kiss, gasping for air. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his breathing ragged and hot against her skin. "Lena," he rasped. "Lena, wait." He didn't push her away, but his hands stopped moving. He held her still. Lena blinked, dazed, her chest heaving. "What? Did I do something wrong?" "No," Nico said, lifting his head to look at her. His eyes were black pools of want, but his jaw was set in a line of iron control. "You did nothing wrong. God, you are perfect." He brought a hand up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her swollen lips. "But you are vulnerable right now," he said, his voice rough. "You are scared, and you are exhausted, and you are in my house because you have nowhere else to go. If I take you to bed tonight, I do not want you to wake up tomorrow and feel like you paid for your safety with your body." Lena stared at him. The realization of what he was saying washed over her. He wanted her. She could feel the evidence of that pressed against her, but he was prioritizing her dignity over his desire. He was refusing to be another man who took advantage of her situation. In that moment, Lena didn't just feel desire. She felt something far more dangerous. She felt love. "I would not feel that way," she whispered. "I would," Nico said firmly, "and I need to be able to look you in the eye tomorrow when we figure out how to handle Derek." He gently took her hips and helped her slide off his lap, settling her onto the cushion beside him. He kept his arm around her shoulders, pulling her into his side. "Stay here," he said. "Sleep. I'm not going anywhere." Lena curled against him, resting her head on his chest. She listened to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. It was a lullaby against the chaos of her life. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes growing heavy. "Sleep. Lena." Within minutes, the exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into a dreamless sleep. Nico stayed awake. He held her with one arm, his other hand resting on his knee, clenched into a fist. He stared out at the city skyline, his eyes cold and calculating. He watched the lights of Harborview flicker in the dark, his mind working through angles and contingencies. Derek Walsh had crossed a line tonight. He had invaded the one place Lena should have felt safe. He had threatened a child. Nico had promised Lena he would protect her. He had promised not to use violence. But as he felt the soft weight of her sleeping form against him, Nico knew that keeping both of those promises was going to be the hardest thing he had ever done. He would have to destroy Derek Walsh, but he would have to do it without leaving a fingerprint and without shattering the fragile trust of the woman in his arms. He watched the city, and he planned for 3 days. Lena Carter allowed herself to believe in a new version of reality. The routine was seductive in its stability. At 8 in the morning, she dropped Eli off at Mrs. Gable's apartment, where a private security detail disguised as a parked maintenance van watched the street. By 9, she was at Serafina, not in a waitress apron, but in a tailored blazer, clutching a clipboard and managing the logistics for a high-profile engagement party. She felt competent. She felt useful. For the first time in years, she felt like she was building something rather than just surviving. Nico was always nearby, a silent orbit of dark suits and watchful eyes. But he gave her space to work. He let her breathe. But peace, in Harborview, was often just the deep breath before the scream. Across the city, in a warehouse that smelled of rusted iron and stagnant water, Derek Walsh was busy shattering that peace. He sat at a folding table, his hands clasping and unclasping, sweat beading on his upper lip despite the chill in the air. Across from him sat Marco Vieri. If Nico Costa was a tiger, lethal but calculated, Marco Vieri was a hyena. He was younger, hungrier, and lacked the code of honor that the old families still pretended to uphold. "You say he is vulnerable," Marco said, picking at a splinter on the table. "Nico Costa is never vulnerable. He's a fortress. He's distracted," Derek insisted, his voice rising in pitch. "He's obsessed with my ex-wife. He's keeping her at the club late tonight for an event. He has moved half his best men to the perimeter of the penthouse where he is keeping my son." Marco's eyes glinted. "So the club is light on security?" "The back entrance near the kitchen," Derek said, pushing a crumpled blueprint across the table. "He took the lock codes from me when we were married, but I remember the shift changes. Between 10 and 10:30, the delivery bay is open for the linen service. There is a blind spot in the cameras." "And you want what?" Marco asked, studying the map. "Money? I want my family back." Derek spat, his face twisting with a self-righteous fury that masked his jealousy. "You scare him. You hurt his business. You make him realize she is a liability. When chaos hits, I will be there to pick up the pieces. I take Lena. I take the boy. You take the territory." Marco smiled, and it was an expression devoid of warmth. Done. Saturday night at Serafina was a crescendo of noise and light. The private engagement party was in full swing in the VIP lounge, while the main floor was packed with the weekend rush. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, truffle oil, and anticipation. Lena stood near the service bar, checking the inventory of champagne. She was tired, but it was a good tired. She tapped her pen against the clipboard, smiling as she watched a young couple toast across the room. Nico was at the far end of the bar, speaking in low tones to Enzo. He looked up, catching her eye across the sea of patrons. He didn't smile, but he nodded. A small, intimate gesture that made Lena's stomach flip. He started walking toward her, moving through the crowd with that effortless parting-the-sea grace he possessed. He was 10 feet away when the world exploded. It started with a sound like a thunder crack, shattering the ambient jazz. The front window, a massive pane of etched glass, blew inward in a glittering, deadly shower. Screams erupted instantly. They were high-pitched, primal sounds of terror that cut through the sudden silence. Before Lena could process the noise, before she could register the dark shapes of men stepping through the broken window with weapons raised, she was flying. A heavy weight slammed into her side. It was not a shove, it was a tackle. Nico hit her with the force of a freight train, wrapping his arms around her waist and driving her down behind the solid oak of the bar. They hit the floor hard. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but she didn't feel the pain because Nico was immediately on top of her. He covered her completely, his broad frame forming a human shield over her body. "Stay down," he roared, his voice unrecognizable in its ferocity. Above them, the air turned into a war zone. Pop, pop, pop sounds echoed off the ceiling. Gunfire, sharp and terrifying. Bottles on the shelves behind the bar exploded. raining shards of glass and expensive liquor down on them. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, her hands clutching at Nico's shirt. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, a rapid, heavy hammer. His breath was hot and ragged against her ear. "I have got you," he whispered, a desperate mantra. "I have got you. Lena, keep your head down, do not move." She felt him flinch as something heavy, maybe a bottle, maybe debris, struck his shoulder, but he did not shift an inch. He caged her head with his arm, pressing her face into the crook of his neck to protect her from the glass. His other hand gripped her hip so tight it was bruising, anchoring her to the floor, anchoring her to him. The chaos seemed to last for hours, but it was likely less than 2 minutes. Nico's security team was returning fire now, the deeper boom of their weapons answering the cracks of the attackers. There were shouts, the sound of running feet, and then the screech of tires peeling away on the asphalt outside. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sobbing of a patron near the door and the drip, drip, drip of spilled alcohol. Nico shifted, lifting his head but keeping his body over hers. "Enzo! Report, clear!" Enzo's voice shouted back, sounding breathless. They ran. "Hit and run. Boss, 2 casualties near the door. Police are 3 minutes out." Nico looked down at Lena. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes were frantically scanning her face. "Are you hit?" he demanded. "Lena, look at me." "Does anything hurt? I do not think so," she stammered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "Up! We are leaving! Now!" He hauled her to her feet, not giving her a moment to look at the destruction. He kept her tucked into his side, his arm like an iron band around her ribs. He moved her fast, half carrying her through the kitchen, past the terrified chefs cowering under stainless steel tables. They burst out the back exit into the alleyway. A black SUV was already idling there, the engine purring. Nico threw the back door open and practically shoved Lena inside. "Get in!" he barked. He dove in after her, slamming the door. "Go!" he shouted at the driver. "The safe house by the water. And call Maria. Tell her to initiate the Chimera protocol. Get the boy out of the penthouse and bring him to the location. Now!" The car surged forward, tires biting into the pavement. Lena was thrown back against the leather seat. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Nico turned to her, reaching out to grab her hands. Lena, breathe." "What was that?" she gasped, looking at him with wide, horrified eyes. "Nico, they were shooting. People were screaming." "I know," he said grimly. "I know. Is Eli safe?" she demanded, clutching his hands. "Tell me he is safe." "He is safe," Nico promised, his voice fierce. "The penthouse is a fortress, but I am moving him to where we are going just to be sure." He was nowhere near this. Lena slumped back against the seat, the adrenaline beginning to curdle into nausea. She looked down at her arm. There was a tear in her blazer, and a dark stain was spreading on the white fabric of her blouse. "You are bleeding," Nico said. He moved immediately, ripping the sleeve of her blazer further to inspect the wound. It was a long, shallow gash, likely from a flying shard of a vodka bottle. "It is okay," he murmured, his voice shifting from commander to caretaker. "It is not deep. We will clean it up when we get there." The rest of the drive passed in a blur of streetlights and silence. They drove out of the city, past the suburbs, until the roads became dark and winding. They could smell the salt air before they saw the water. The safe house was a modern, angular structure perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It looked lonely and impenetrable. The car pulled into a subterranean garage, and the heavy metal gate clanged shut behind them, sealing them in. Inside, the house was stark and cold. Nico led her into the bathroom off the master bedroom. The lights were harsh, reflecting off the white tile. "Sit," he instructed, lifting her onto the counter. He found a first aid kit and began to work. He cleaned the blood from her arm with antiseptic wipes, his movements precise and gentle. Lena watched him. She watched the way his jaw worked, the muscle ticking. And then she saw it. His hands were shaking. The man who had barked orders, who had shielded her body with his own, who controlled a criminal empire, his hands were trembling as he held the gauze against her skin. He stopped, closing his eyes for a second to steady himself. "You are scared," Lena whispered. Nico opened his eyes. He didn't look at her. He looked at the bandage he was taping down. I almost lost you, he said. His voice was rough, like gravel. Another inch to the left, and that glass could have been a bullet. He finished the bandage and stepped back, leaning against the sink as if his legs could no longer hold his weight. Lena slid off the counter. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a sudden, hot surge of anger. It was the anger of a mother, the anger of a woman who had tried so hard to escape violence only to be dragged back into the center of it. This is your life, Nico, she said, her voice rising. This is what you do. Gunshots in a restaurant, people bleeding on the floor. Nico looked at her, his expression hardening defensively. I did not order that attack. No, but you attracted it, she shouted, stepping toward him. You told me I would be safe. You told me I could work a normal job. There is nothing normal about being tackled behind a bar while machine guns go off. Derek did this, Nico shot back, his volume matching hers. Do not mistake the enemy. Lena, this has Derek's stink all over it. He sold information to Vieri. He put you in the line of fire, not me. But I am in the line of fire because of you, Lena cried. Because I am near you. Because I sat on your lap that one night. If I had never met you, I would just be a waitress dealing with a stalker. Not this war. Nico went silent. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He turned away, walking into the bedroom, pacing like a caged animal. You are right, he said, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. You are right. I am poison to you. He stopped by the window, staring out at the black ocean. I wanted to believe I could have this, he admitted. Speaking to the glass, I wanted to believe I could have a woman like you, someone decent, someone who looks at me and sees a man, not a boss. I wanted a future that does not fit in this life. He turned back to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a torture she had never seen before. I have been so scared. Lena, terrified. Not of the bullets. I am used to the bullets. I am terrified that my selfishness is going to get you killed. Lena looked at him. She saw the tremor in his hands return. She saw the guilt eating him alive. He wasn't a monster reveling in the violence. He was a man trapped by it, desperate to keep the one clean thing he had found. The anger drained out of her, leaving only a raw, aching ache in her chest. She crossed the room. She didn't stop until she was standing right in front of him. You saved me tonight, she said softly. Derek threw me to the wolves. You threw yourself in front of me. She reached up and cupped his face with both hands. His skin was rough with stubble, hot to the touch. I am scared too, she whispered. I am terrified, but I am not leaving. Nico looked at her as if she were a ghost. You should leave. You should run as far as you can. Make me, she challenged. A groan tore from his throat. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against him with a force that knocked the breath out of her. I cannot, he confessed against her hair. God help me, I cannot let you go. Then don't. She kissed him. It wasn't a tentative exploration like on the rooftop. It was a collision. It was a kiss, fueled by the adrenaline still coursing through their veins, by the terror of death, by the desperate need to prove they were alive. Nico's mouth was demanding, hungry. Lena met him with equal force, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him down to her. The world outside, the gunmen, the police, the shattered glass, ceased to exist. The only reality was the heat of his body and the taste of him. He lifted her, his hands gripping her thighs, and she wrapped her legs around his waist. He carried her backward toward the bed, neither of them breaking the kiss. They stumbled, legs tangling, until they fell onto the mattress in a tangle of limbs. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her waist, sliding under the hem of her torn shirt to touch the warm skin of her back. Lena arched into his touch, a gasp escaping her lips as his thumb grazed the sensitive skin of her hip. She pulled his shirt over his head, needing to feel him, skin to skin. His chest was hard, marked with the map of his violent life, old scars, white lines against tanned skin. She pressed her palms against his heart, feeling it hammer against her hands. Nico hovered over her, bracing his weight on his forearms. He looked down at her, his eyes dark and dilated, burning with an intensity that made her shiver. "I need you," he rasped. "I need to feel you." Lena reached up, tracing the line of his jaw. "I am here, Nico. I am right here." He lowered his head, burying his face in the crook of her neck, pressing open-mouthed kisses to the pulse point that fluttered there. His hand moved to her hand, interlacing their fingers, squeezing tight. It was a gesture of anchoring. He was holding on to her as if she were the only thing keeping him from drifting into the abyss. Their movements became urgent, a rhythm of survival. There were whispered names, broken promises of safety, and the friction of skin against skin. It was a reclaiming. In the face of death, they were claiming life. They were claiming each other. The room faded into shadows, the sound of the ocean outside drowned out by the sound of their breathing, the rustle of sheets, and the quiet, desperate language of two people who had finally stopped running. Later, the room was silent. The only light came from the moon reflecting off the water outside, casting pale blue stripes across the bed. Lena lay with her head on Nico's chest, her fingers idly tracing a jagged scar that ran along his ribs. Nico was awake. He was staring at the ceiling, one arm draped protectively over Lena, holding her close to his side. His breathing had slowed, but the tension hadn't fully left his body. "That one was a knife," Nico said quietly, feeling her finger pause on the scar. 7 years ago. A dispute over territory. "Does it ever end?" Lena asked softly. "The fighting. It ends when you are the last one standing," Nico said. "Or when you are in the ground." He shifted, turning on his side to look at her. He brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his touch agonizingly gentle. "I have made a decision." "Lena, what decision?" "I have spent my life building this empire because I thought power meant safety," Nico said. "I thought if I was the biggest monster in the dark, nothing could hurt me. But tonight I realized that the empire is the target, and you are standing next to the target." He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, one by one. "I am going to end it," he vowed. "I am going to cooperate with Monroe. I am going to give them Marco Vieri. I am going to give them the operations that are too dirty to keep. But that puts you in danger," Lena whispered. "You said snitches get killed." "I am not a snitch," Nico said, his eyes hard as flint. "I am a king burning down his own castle to save the queen." He pulled her closer, pressing his forehead against hers. "I will burn everything down. Lena, the clubs, the money, the reputation, if that is what it takes to keep you and Eli safe, I will burn it all to ash." Lena looked into his eyes and saw that he meant it. It terrified her, the magnitude of what he was willing to lose, but it also comforted her in a way nothing else could. "We will figure it out," she whispered. "Together." "Together," Nico echoed. He kissed her forehead, then settled back against the pillows, pulling the duvet up over her shoulders. "Sleep now. Eli will be here in the morning. We have work to do." Lena closed her eyes, listening to the ocean and the heartbeat of the man who was willing to destroy his world just to give her a place to stand in it. For the first time all night, the trembling stopped. The headline on the Harborview Gazette screamed in bold, black letters. "Gangland violence spills onto Main Street. Shootout at Serafina leaves 2 dead. Dozens terrorized. Below the fold." A smaller but far more damaging article ran with a picture of Lena Carter, shielding her face as she exited a police cruiser. The caption read, "Mother of 6-year-old caught in crossfire of mob war. Derek Walsh and Marco Vieri had worked fast." In the 48 hours following the attack on the lounge, they had spun a narrative that was as airtight as it was damning. To the public and the police, this was not an ambush orchestrated by a rival gang. It was a symptom of Nico Costa's loss of control, a violent turf war that he had invited into a family-friendly neighborhood. And Lena was painted not as a victim, but as a reckless participant. A woman who had dragged her innocent child into the lion's den for the thrill of sleeping with a crime boss. The fallout was immediate. Lena sat in the sterile waiting room of the Harborview family court, her hands trembling in her lap. She wore a modest gray suit she had bought at a thrift store years ago, trying to look like the responsible, boring mother she actually was. But she felt like a criminal. Every time the heavy oak doors of the courtroom opened, she flinched. Nico was not here. He couldn't be. His presence would only validate every accusation Derek was making. Instead, Lena was alone, flanked only by Mrs. Holloway, whose grim expression suggested she knew this was a losing battle. "Miss Carter," the bailiff called out, "they are ready for you." Walking into the courtroom felt like walking to the gallows. Derek was already seated. He looked well-rested, wearing a navy suit that projected stability and sorrow. He didn't look at her with anger today. He looked at her with a performance of profound disappointment, playing to the judge, a balding man named Judge Reynolds, who was known for his conservative stance on child endangerment. The hearing began with a brutal efficiency. Derek's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, wasted no time. "Your Honor," he said, pacing before the bench, "we are not here to debate the character of Miss Carter as a person. We are here to discuss her judgment as a mother. 2 nights ago, the establishment where she works, and where she has admitted to spending significant personal time, was riddled with over 100 bullets." Thorne walked back to his table and picked up a stack of enlarged photographs. He placed them on an easel facing the judge. The first photo showed the shattered front window of Serafina. The second showed the bar, covered in glass and blood. The third was a grainy surveillance shot from a traffic camera, showing Lena getting into a black SUV registered to a shell corporation linked to Nico Costa. "This is the environment, miss. Carter has chosen," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a grave whisper. "She has taken a 6-year-old boy out of his school and hidden him in a safe house. Her word, Your Honor, guarded by armed men. She's not co-parenting. She's playing a dangerous game with organized crime, and she is using her son as a pawn." Lena gripped the edge of the table. "That is a lie," she said, her voice shaking. "I was protecting him from his father's stalking. Miss Carter, speak only when addressed." Judge Reynolds snapped. Thorne smiled thinly. "We have sworn affidavits from neighbors stating they have seen known felons entering and exiting Miss Carter's previous residence. We have police reports confirming that the man she is cohabitating with, Mr. Nico Costa, is currently the subject of a federal racketeering investigation." He turned to Lena. "I call Lena Carter to the stand." The walk to the witness box felt miles long. Lena swore to tell the truth, her hand resting on the Bible, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Miss Carter," Thorne began, leaning against the railing, "are you currently in a romantic relationship with Nico Costa?" Lena hesitated. She looked at Mrs. Holloway, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "You have to answer." "Yes," Lena whispered. "I cannot hear you," Thorne said. "Yes," Lena said louder, lifting her chin. "I am." "And were you aware, when you entered this relationship, that Mr. Costa is the head of the Costa crime family? He owns a security firm and several restaurants." Lena said. Thorne chuckled darkly. "Do honest restaurateurs typically require bulletproof glass and armed convoys? Miss Carter? Did you or did you not flee a shooting scene in his vehicle 2 nights ago?" "I did," Lena said, tears stinging her eyes. "Because we were attacked. Because he was attacked," Thorne corrected. "And you were there. You were in the line of fire. If your son had been with you, as he often is at the restaurant, would he have been safe?" "He was not with me," Lena insisted. "I would never put Eli in danger." "But you have," Thorne said, slamming a hand down on the railing, "by choosing a lover who has a target on his back. You have painted a target on your son. You chose your desire for a criminal over the safety of your child. Is that not the definition of negligence?" "Objection, Mrs. Holloway stood up, argumentative, sustained. The judge muttered, but the damage was done. Reynolds looked at Lena with cold, hard eyes. He didn't need to hear much more. When the ruling came down 20 minutes later, it broke Lena's world into jagged pieces, based on the evidence presented regarding the immediate threat of violence surrounding the mother's current residence and associations. Judge Reynolds said, his voice booming in the quiet room. I am granting temporary primary physical custody to the father, Derek Walsh, effective immediately." "No," Lena gasped, standing up. "You cannot do that. He's dangerous. Sit down, Miss." "Carter," the bailiff warned. "Miss Carter's visitation rights are hereby restricted to supervised visits only, to be conducted at the county center, pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services," the judge continued, ignoring her outburst. "The child is to be turned over to Mr. Walsh's custody by 6 o'clock this evening." Lena looked at Derek. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was looking at her. And for a split second, the mask of the grieving father slipped, and she saw the smirk of the predator who had finally cornered his prey. The hallway outside the courtroom was a blur of motion and noise, but Lena felt numb. She felt as though her blood had been drained and replaced with ice water. She walked out, stumbling slightly, and nearly ran into a solid wall of black wool. Nico caught her by the arms. He had been waiting just outside the double doors, defying his lawyer's advice to stay away. He looked exhausted, his eyes dark and rimmed with red, but his grip was firm. "Lena?" he asked, searching her face. "What happened? Talk to me." Lena looked up at him. She saw the man she loved. She saw the man who had held her while she cried, who had taken a bullet of glass for her. But she also saw the reason she had just lost her son. "He took him," Lena whispered. The judge gave Eli to Derek. Nico's face went pale. "We will appeal. I will get the best lawyers in the state. We will fix this." "Fix it?" Lena's voice cracked, rising into a hysterical pitch. "You cannot fix this, Nico. This is not a broken window you can replace. This is my son." She shoved his hands off her arms, stepping back. "They showed photos of the shooting," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush of venom. "They showed photos of your car. They said I chose a criminal over my child, and they were right." "Lena, stop," Nico said, stepping toward her, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "That is Derek talking. That is the narrative he built. He manipulated this. And you gave him the ammunition," Lena screamed. People in the hallway stopped and stared, but she didn't care. "You brought this world into my life. The guns, the guards, the enemies. I was just a waitress. Nico, I was poor. But I had my son. Now I have nothing. I am trying to protect you," Nico said, his voice straining with suppressed emotion. "If you leave me now, Derek wins. He's dangerous when he thinks he is winning. He already won," Lena cried. "He has Eli, and it is my fault because I thought I could be with you. I thought I could have this fantasy. But I cannot be with you and be a mother." She turned away, tears streaming down her face, blinding her. "Lena, wait," Nico called after her. "Do not walk away alone. Not now. I need space." She sobbed, not looking back. "I need you to leave me alone. Do not follow me." She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and held the power button down until the screen went black. She shoved it back in, wiping her eyes furiously, and pushed through the revolving doors out into the gray, overcast afternoon. Nico stood in the hallway, watching her go. His fists were clenched at his sides, his heart tearing in two. He signaled to Enzo, who was standing a few feet away. "Follow her," Nico ordered, his voice low and deadly. "Do not let her see you, but do not let her out of your sight." The city felt hostile. The wind whipped Lena's hair across her face as she walked, blindly navigating the streets toward the public parking structure where she had left her car. She needed to get to the daycare. She needed to see Eli one last time before Derek came to collect him. She needed to smell his hair and tell him that this wasn't forever, even though it felt like a death sentence. She reached the parking garage, a concrete monolith that smelled of exhaust and damp cement. Her car was on the 3rd level. The structure was quiet. It was mid-afternoon, the lull between shifts. Her footsteps echoed loudly on the concrete. She reached her sedan, fumbling for her keys. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped them. They clattered onto the ground, sliding under the chassis. "Damn it," she sobbed, dropping to her knees to reach for them. "Need some help?" The voice came from behind her. It was smooth, familiar, and terrifying. Lena froze. She looked up. Derek was leaning against a concrete pillar 10 feet away. He had loosened his tie. His suit jacket was unbuttoned. He looked relaxed, like a man who had just closed the biggest deal of his life. "Get away from me," Lena said, scrambling to her feet, clutching her keys like a weapon. "You missed the celebration," Derek said, pushing off the pillar and walking slowly toward her. "I was hoping we could get a drink." "Celebrate our new arrangement. You are sick," Lena spat, backing up until her hips hit the door of her car. "You lied to the court. You lied about everything. I told a version of the truth," Derek said with a shrug, "and I won. That is what matters." "Lena, I always win. Did you really think you could run to some Dago thug and I would just let you go?" He stopped a few feet from her, his smile vanishing. "I have been watching you, Lena, for months, not just following you, watching." He pulled a small device from his pocket, a phone. He tapped the screen and turned it toward her. Lena looked. It was a video feed. It showed the inside of her old apartment. It showed her bedroom. It showed her sleeping. "I put cameras in the smoke detectors 6 months ago," Derek said softly. "I saw you crying over bills. I saw you playing with Eli. I saw everything." Lena felt bile rise in her throat. She felt violated in a way that made her skin crawl. "You are a monster." "I am a father who wants his family back," Derek said. "And now I have Eli, and soon I will have you." He took a step forward. "No!" Lena screamed. She lunged for her car door, jamming the key into the lock, but Derek was faster. He crossed the distance in 2 strides. His hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm in a grip that crushed the muscle. "You are coming with me," he growled. "Let me go!" Lena shrieked, swinging her free hand. Her nails raked across his cheek, leaving 4 bright red lines. Derek hissed in pain, but he didn't let go. Instead, he backhanded her. The blow was sharp and shocking. Lena's head snapped back, stars exploding in her vision. She slumped against the car, dazed. Derek grabbed her by the hair and dragged her away from her vehicle. A white cargo van screeched around the corner of the ramp, driven by one of Marco's men. The side door slid open. Lena kicked and thrashed, screaming for help, but the garage was empty. The sound of traffic from the street below swallowed her cries. "Get in!" Derek shouted, shoving her toward the open door. Lena grabbed the door frame, digging her fingers into the rubber seal. "I am not going with you. You will have to kill me." Derek looked at her, his eyes dead and cold. "If you do not get in the van," he whispered, leaning close to her ear, "I call Marco, and Marco pays a visit to Mrs. Gable's apartment right now, before the police can even pick up Eli." Lena went still. The fight drained out of her instantly. "Good girl," Derek said. He shoved her inside. She tumbled onto the metal floor of the van. Derek climbed in after her, and the door slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. As the van sped away, Lena curled into a ball, clutching her stomach, and prayed that Nico, the man she had pushed away, was still watching. In his office at the back of Serafina, Nico was pacing. The room was soundproof, detached from the noises of the kitchen prep going on outside. Enzo burst through the door, his face pale. "Boss, we lost her." Nico stopped mid-stride. "What do you mean you lost her?" "She went into the parking structure on 4th, Enzo said, breathless. "I was 2 cars back. By the time I got up the ramp..." "Her car is there. Her keys are on the ground, but she is gone." Nico felt the blood drain from his face. He didn't ask questions. He didn't yell. He went into a place of cold, absolute clarity. "Derek," he said. He pulled his phone out. He didn't call his soldiers. He didn't call his captains. He dialed a number he had memorized but never intended to use. Agent Monroe picked up on the 2nd ring. "Costa, I assume you are calling to confess?" "I am calling to make a trade," Nico said, his voice flat. "I am listening." "I give you Marco Vieri." Nico said. "I give you the location of his distribution center. I give you his ledger, which I know he keeps at the warehouse on the docks. And I give you Derek Walsh, who is currently working with him." Monroe was silent for a moment. "That is a big fish." "Costa, what do you want?" "I want 10 minutes, Nico said. 10 minutes for what? My ex-girlfriend has been taken," Nico said, his voice cracking slightly on the word, "by Walsh and Vieri. They have her at the docks. I know that is where they are going because that is Marco's stronghold. If we go in there," Monroe said, "it is a federal raid. We cannot have civilians running around. I'm not asking for permission, Nico said. I am telling you that I am going in. You can come in after me and arrest whoever is left standing. But if you want Vieri, you let me through the door first. There was a long pause. Nico could hear Monroe breathing on the other end. If I see a gun in your hand when I come through that door, Costa, I will put you down, Monroe warned. If you do not get there fast enough, Nico replied. You will not have to. He hung up. Nico turned to Enzo. Get the vests. Get the heavy kit. Enzo's eyes widened. We are hitting the warehouse? That is suicide. Boss, Marco has 30 men there. I do not care if he has an army, Nico snarled, moving to the safe hidden behind a painting on the wall. He spun the dial and pulled the heavy steel door open. Inside lay a matte black Kevlar vest and a handgun with a heavy, customized grip. Nico pulled the vest on, fastening the Velcro straps tight across his chest. He checked the magazine of the gun, sliding it home with a sharp click. He tucked the weapon into the holster at his hip. He paused for a second, pulling his phone out one last time. He opened the gallery. There was a photo Lena had sent him a week ago. It was a selfie of her and Eli making pizza in the penthouse kitchen. There was flour on her nose. She was laughing. She looked happy. She looked safe. Nico stared at the image, searing it into his mind. He knew what this meant. Even if he survived tonight, his life as he knew it was over. He had just handed his empire to the FBI. He would go to prison. He would lose everything he had built for 20 years. But as he looked at Lena's smile, he realized that everything he had built was worthless compared to the woman in the picture. He put the phone away. Let's go, he said to Enzo. He walked out of the office, past the stunned kitchen staff, and out into the alley where the black SUV waited. He was walking toward his death, or his incarceration, and he had never felt more sure of anything in his life. I am coming. Lena, he whispered to the wind, just hold on. The smell of the warehouse was a cocktail of rotting wood, diesel fuel, and the brine of the stagnant harbor water lapping against the pilings beneath the floorboards. It was a cold, hollow space, vast and filled with shadows that seemed to stretch like skeletal fingers in the dim light of the overhead halogen bulbs. Lena sat in the center of this cavernous room, her wrists bound tightly to the arms of a rusted metal chair with plastic zip ties. Her blazer was gone, lost in the struggle at the parking garage, and the evening chill bit through her thin blouse. Her cheek throbbed where Derek had struck her, a dull, rhythmic ache that matched the pounding of her heart, but she was not crying, not anymore. The terror that had gripped her in the van had calcified into a cold, hard rage. Derek paced in front of her, his expensive shoes clicking on the concrete floor. He was manic, his hands flying as he spoke, gesturing to the empty air as if addressing a jury that only he could see. You see, Lena, he said, spinning around to face her. His tie was crooked, his eyes wide and feverish. This is what happens when you make bad choices. You forced my hand. I did not want to bring you here. I wanted to take you to dinner. I wanted to discuss Eli's summer camp schedule. But you had to run. You had to choose him. He pointed a shaking finger toward the heavy steel doors at the far end of the warehouse. You chose a criminal over your family, Derek spat. You let a thug touch you. You let him buy you things. You let him play father to my son. He's more of a father than you have been in years, Lena said. Her voice was hoarse, but it was steady. Derek stopped pacing, his face contorted, a mask of wounded ego. That is the brainwashing talking. That is his influence. But do not worry. Once he is gone, you will see clearly again. You will understand that I did this for us, for Eli. Eli is never going to be safe with you, Lena said, lifting her chin. You kidnapped his mother. You are working with murderers. Do you think a judge is going to give you custody after this? Derek laughed, a high, jagged sound. The judge will never know about this. As far as the law is concerned, Nico Costa died in a drug deal gone wrong, and I saved you from the crossfire. I will be the hero. Lena again. In the shadows near the loading dock, Marco Vieri leaned against a stack of crates, watching the domestic drama with visible boredom. He checked his gold watch. then looked at Derek with disdain. "Stop talking, Walsh," Marco barked. "You are giving me a headache. Is he coming or not?" "He's coming," Derek promised, turning back to the door. He cannot resist playing the white knight, outside. The night was silent. The heavy fog that rolled off the harbor muffled the city sounds, creating a blanket of isolation around the docks. A lone black sedan rolled slowly down the cracked asphalt access road. It did not speed. It did not screech to a halt. It simply arrived, the tires crunching softly over the gravel. Inside the car, Nico killed the engine. The silence inside the vehicle was heavy. He looked at the dashboard clock. It was 9:42 in the evening. He tapped his earpiece, a tiny, almost invisible device tucked into his left ear. "Are we set?" he whispered. A voice crackled back, static-laced but clear. "We are in position. Costa. We have eyes on the south and east entrances. Tactical teams are stacked. Wait for the signal. And Costa? Yeah? Do not get yourself killed before we get through the door. We need you to testify." Nico removed the earpiece and crushed it in his hand, dropping the pieces into the center console. He checked his reflection in the rear-view mirror, and he looked tired. He looked like a man who had lived 1,000 years in the last week. He reached into his jacket pocket and touched the photo of Lena and Eli one last time, a talisman against the darkness waiting for him. Then, he opened the car door. He stepped out into the mist, raising his hands to shoulder height, palms open. He walked toward the small service door cut into the massive rolling steel gate of the warehouse. He did not carry a weapon in his hands. He did not flinch. He walked with the inevitable momentum of a tide coming in. He pushed the door open. The sound of the rusted hinges shrieked through the warehouse, drawing every eye in the room. Lena's head snapped up. When she saw him, a sound escaped her throat, half sob, half gasp. He stood framed in the doorway, the darkness of the night swirling behind him. He looked unarmed. He looked vulnerable. And he looked at her with such intense, consuming love that it nearly brought her to her knees. "Nico," she whispered. Nico did not look at Marco. He did not look at the 6 armed men standing in the periphery with submachine guns leveled at his chest. He looked only at Lena. He took in the zip ties, the bruise on her cheek, the fear in her eyes. His jaw tightened until the muscle feathering there looked like steel, but his voice was calm. "I am here," he said. Derek laughed. It was a triumphant, ugly sound. "Look at him," Derek crowed, stepping toward Nico but staying well out of reach. "The big bad wolf." "You do not look so scary without your army, do you?" "I came alone," Nico said, his eyes finally sliding to Derek. "Just like you asked. Now let her go." Derek shook his head, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Not yet. We have unfinished business. You stole my life, Costa. You embarrassed me. You think you can just walk in here and take what is mine? She is not yours," Nico said softly. "She is not property. Derek, that is why you lost her. Not because of me, because you do not know how to love anything you cannot control." "Shut up," Derek screamed. Marco stepped forward, pushing off the crates. "Enough talk. Kill him." Derek held up a hand. "No, not yet. I want him to beg." He pulled a handgun from the back of his waistband, a small, shiny thing that looked ridiculous in his shaking hand. He pointed it at Nico's chest. "On your knees," Derek commanded. Nico did not move. He stood tall, his hands still raised, his gaze shifting to Marco. "You are making a mistake, Vieri," Nico said evenly. "This is not a turf war. This is a kidnapping. The heat from this will burn everything you own." Marco sneered. "You are the one who is going to burn." Nico, Derek, sensing he was losing control of the room, turned back to Lena. He grabbed the back of her chair and yanked it violently, making her head snap back. "Tell him." "Lena," Derek shouted, "tell him to get on his knees if he wants you to live." "I will not," Lena yelled back, staring up at her ex-husband with blazing eyes. "I will never beg you for anything." Derek's face turned purple with rage. He raised his hand, the one holding the gun, as if to pistol whip her across the face. "I said tell him," Derek shrieked, swinging his arm down. The movement was the trigger. Time seemed to fracture. Nico did not drop to his knees. He launched himself forward. He moved with an explosive speed that belied his size, covering the 20 feet between them in a blur of motion. "Derek!" Lena screamed. Nico did not go for Derek. He went for Lena. As Derek's arm came down, Nico threw his body across the chair, shielding Lena with his own mass. He tackled her and the chair sideways, crashing them both to the concrete floor just as the sound of gunfire erupted from all sides. There was a deafening crack from Derek's gun. A wild, panicked shot fired at point-blank range. Nico grunted a sharp, wet sound, and his body jerked violently against Lena's. "Stay down!" Nico roared, his voice strained with pain. Suddenly, the warehouse skylights shattered inward. Canisters dropped from the ceiling, hissing as they hit the floor and spewing thick white smoke. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" The booming voice was amplified, echoing off the metal walls. The heavy rolling doors at the back of the warehouse burst open with a mechanical groan, and a tactical team in full body armor swarmed in, their weapon lights cutting through the smoke like lasers. Marco's men scrambled, firing blindly into the haze. The air filled with the deafening staccato of automatic fire and the shouts of men panicking. Marco Vieri tried to run for the side exit, but he was tackled by 2 agents before he made it 3 steps. Derek, disoriented by the flashbangs and the sudden chaos, stumbled back, waving his gun wildly. "Drop it, Walsh! Drop it now!" Agent Monroe's voice cut through the din. Derek spun around, looking for a target, looking for a way out. He saw the wall of agents advancing on him. He saw the red laser dots dancing on his chest. He dropped the gun. It clattered to the floor. Before he could even raise his hands, he was slammed face first into the concrete. Hands wrenched his arms behind his back, and the metallic click of handcuffs signaled the end of his war. Lena did not watch Derek get arrested. She was struggling to free herself from the overturned chair, her eyes fixed on the man lying on top of her. Nico rolled off her, groaning through gritted teeth. He slumped onto his back, his hand pressed tightly against his left side, just below the ribs. Dark blood was already seeping through his fingers, staining his white shirt a terrifying crimson. "Nico!" Lena screamed, ripping her wrists against the zip ties until the plastic bit into her skin. An agent rushed over, a knife flashing as he cut her bonds. Lena didn't even thank him. She scrambled onto her knees, crawling the 2 feet to Nico's side. She pressed her hands over his, adding her pressure to the wound. The blood was hot and sticky. There was so much of it. "Nico, look at me," she sobbed, her tears dripping onto his face. "Stay with me. Do not you dare close your eyes." Nico blinked, his eyelids fluttering. His face had gone an ashy gray, sweat beading on his forehead. He focused on her, his gaze hazy but present. Did they get him?" he rasped. "They got him." Lena cried, choking on a sob. "They got all of them. It is over." "You are safe." Nico managed a weak, lopsided smile. "No, you are safe." "Stop talking," Lena begged. "Help! We need a medic over here." She looked back down at him, her heart breaking. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry I walked away. I'm so sorry I blamed you. I love you, Nico. I do not care who you were. I do not care about the business. I just want you, please." Nico reached up with his clean hand. His fingers were cold, but his touch was gentle as he brushed a tear from her cheek. "I told you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the shouts of the agents securing the scene. "I told you. I will protect you." His hand slipped from her cheek to the floor, and his eyes drifted shut. "Nico," Lena screamed, collapsing onto his chest, sobbing his name into the silence that followed the storm. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room were aggressively bright, a stark contrast to the darkness of the warehouse. Lena sat in a plastic chair, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket an EMT had given her. She had refused to leave until she had news. Agent Monroe walked in, holding 2 cups of vending machine coffee. He looked tired, but satisfied. He sat down next to Lena, handing her one of the cups. "He's out of surgery," Monroe said quietly. Lena turned to him, her eyes wide and desperate. "Is he?" "He made it," Monroe said. "The bullet missed the artery." Shattered a rib and tore up some muscle, but he is stable. He's going to be in the ICU for a few days, but he is tough." Lena let out a long breath, her entire body sagging with relief. She brought the coffee to her lips, her hands trembling. "What happens now?" she asked. "To him?" Monroe took a sip of his coffee. "Well, the deal stands. Nico gave us Marco Vieri on a silver platter. We found the ledger in the warehouse, just like he said. Vieri is going away for life. And Derek is looking at kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy. He will not be seeing the outside of a cell for 20 years. "And Nico?" Lena asked. Monroe looked at the ceiling. "Technically, Nico Costa is a criminal, but the Department of Justice likes to reward cooperation. He's going to have to plead guilty to some lesser charges. He will do some time, maybe 18 months in a minimum security facility. After that, 5 years of strict probation." He looked at Lena. "But part of the deal was that his assets are seized, the illegal ones, the clubs, the gambling fronts, they are gone. When he gets out, he starts from zero." Lena smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. "Zero is fine," she said. "We can work with zero." Monroe stood up and patted her on the shoulder. "You can go see him in an hour." 18 months later. The townhouse was small, tucked away in a quiet suburb on the edge of Harborview, where the lawns were green and the neighbors waved when they picked up their mail. It wasn't a penthouse, and it wasn't a luxury apartment. It was a home. In the living room, 7-year-old Eli lay on his stomach on the rug, surrounded by crayons. He was drawing a picture of a dog, a golden retriever they had promised to adopt by Christmas. Lena stood in the kitchen, finalizing the payroll for Shield Security Solutions. It was a modest company, specializing in home alarm systems and security for local events. It was boring, legitimate work, and Lena loved every minute of it. She heard the front door open. "Daddy's home," Eli shouted, scrambling up. The words still made Lena's heart squeeze. Derek had signed away his rights in a plea deal to shave a year off his sentence. Nico hadn't officially adopted Eli yet. The paperwork was still pending, but in every way that mattered. The title had been earned. Nico walked into the living room. He looked different. The expensive Italian suits were gone, replaced by dark denim jeans and a gray Henley shirt. He had filled out again, the gauntness of his prison stint replaced by healthy muscle. The shadows under his eyes had lifted. He caught Eli, who launched himself at Nico's legs and swung the boy up into a hug. "How was school, buddy?" Nico asked, his voice warm. "I got a star in math," Eli announced. "That is my boy." Nico grinned, setting him down. "Go wash up for dinner. Mom made lasagna." Eli raced off toward the bathroom. Nico walked into the kitchen. He leaned against the doorframe, watching Lena. "Hey," she said, looking up from her laptop. "Hey," he replied. He walked over and kissed her. It was a domestic kiss, soft and lingering, tasting of peppermint in the cool autumn air. "Did you finish the Thompson contract?" he asked, resting his hands on her waist. "Sent it an hour ago," Lena said, closing the laptop. "We are officially in business with the biggest bakery chain in the city. No shakedowns required." Nico chuckled. "I miss the shakedowns a little." "The paperwork is killing me, liar," Lena teased. Later that evening, the house was quiet. Eli was asleep in his room, the golden retriever drawing taped proudly to his door. Lena and Nico sat on the plush velvet sofa in the living room. The television was playing quietly in the background, but neither of them was watching. Lena shifted, turning to face him, and without asking, she swung her legs over his lap. Nico smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. He adjusted immediately, his arms coming around her waist to secure her. It was a muscle memory, a callback to the night they met, but the desperation of that moment had been replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. "Comfortable?" he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Very," Lena murmured, leaning back into him. She took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. She traced the faint white scar on the back of his hand, a souvenir from the warehouse. "I was thinking about today," she said softly, "about how quiet it is." "Too quiet?" Nico asked, a hint of worry in his voice. "Do you miss the excitement?" "No," Lena said firmly. "I love the quiet. I love that no one is coming through that door unless we invite them." Nico tightened his arms around her, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. "I promised you," he whispered, his voice vibrating against her skin. "What? That I would protect you?" Lena turned her head, pressing a kiss to his temple. "You did," she said. "You protected us from the world." "No," Nico said, lifting his head to look at her. His dark eyes were clear, filled with a devotion that had survived fire and prison and time. "I protected us from the past," he said. "Now. I'm going to protect our future. Not with guns, not with fear. Just this." He gestured to the room, to the drawing on the door, to the woman in his arms. Presence. Lena finished for him. "Honesty. A life we chose," Nico added. He kissed her then. A slow, deep kiss that sealed the promise. It wasn't the kiss of a mafia boss claiming a prize. It was the kiss of a man who had walked through hell to find his home, and the woman who had waited for him on the other side. Lena rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes as the warmth of the living room wrapped around them. For the first time in her life, she didn't need to look over her shoulder. She was exactly where she was meant to be, safe. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Lena and Nico, from the dangerous underworld of Harborview to the peace they finally fought for and won. It has been an incredible experience bringing this mafia romance to life for you. I would love to know, where are you listening from today? Are you tuning in from a busy city like Harborview, or somewhere quiet and peaceful? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of passion, danger, and redemption, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories. Don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts on the ending. Did Nico redeem himself in your eyes? Until next time, keep believing in love that is worth fighting for.